I never thought I'd be scared of my own house. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I first noticed something off. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint bird song outside the window. It was one of those mornings where everything should feel normal, but didn't. It was too quiet, like the house was holding its breath. I remember glancing at the doorway between the kitchen and hallway, feeling, just for a moment, like someone had been standing there. Not seen, just felt. The way you feel someone looking at you from across a room. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a draft, or maybe I was just tired. I'd been working long hours and sleeping poorly. My partner, Jen, was away visiting family, so I was alone for the week. I figured it was just my imagination getting the better of me. But then the little things started happening. The kind of things you don't even register at first. The living room clock ticking louder than usual. A drawer left open that you're sure you closed. The soft thud of something falling in another room, only to find nothing out of place. Once or twice, I thought I heard a footstep on the stairs, but I was downstairs alone. I'd check every time. Nothing. I told myself it was stress. Maybe my brain was just wired from lack of sleep. I tried melatonin, wine, even left the TV on at night just to drown out the silence. But it didn't help. In fact, it got worse. By the third night, I started locking the bedroom door before going to bed. Not because I had a reason to, but because I felt like I had to. I'd lie there, staring at the crack of light under the door, convinced I'd see a shadow break across it. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing. Not loud, just slow and steady, as if someone was on the other side of the door waiting. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard the creak of the floorboards at the end of the hall. The heater wasn't even on, but I'd feel cold. Deep cold, the kind that settled in your bones. I stopped using the upstairs bathroom entirely. It started after I saw the door open by itself. Not just slightly ajar, but all the way, as if someone had turned the knob from the inside and pushed it wide. I had been in the hallway walking past. I froze, heart pounding. I remember just staring at it, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. I told myself it was just loose hinges. But I started avoiding that part of the house. I showered downstairs. Slept with lights on. Kept a kitchen knife by the bed. It wasn't rational, but it made me feel like I had some control. The worst moment came on the fifth night. I had just gone to bed, locked the door, and turned off the lights. I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, trying to steady my breathing. And then from the hallway I heard it. A soft scrape, like something being dragged across the floor. Then another. Closer. A pause. Then a slow knock on the bedroom door. 3 soft taps. Deliberate. Calm. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stared at the door, my throat clenched shut. Another knock. Then silence. I don't know how long I lay there. An hour? 2. I must have dozed off eventually. When I woke up, it was morning. The door was still locked. There was no sign of anything. I checked every room, every window. Nothing broken. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. I didn't sleep in the house again after that. I packed a bag that day and left. Jen came home 3 days later and said everything felt normal to her. She laughed when I told her, said it was probably just a sleep-deprived hallucination. Maybe it was, but I knew something had been in the house. I didn't even go back to pack the rest of my things. I just paid movers and stayed at a hotel until we found a new place. It took months before I could sleep without checking all the doors 3 times. But eventually things settled. Life moved on. The new house was quiet in the right kind of way. But then last week, I got a notification from the old home's security system. Motion detected in the hallway. I hadn't even realized the cameras were still online. Out of curiosity, I opened the app. The video was grainy, dark, but clear enough. The camera faced the same hallway where I'd first felt it. Whatever it was. The image time-stamped for 3:12 a.m. There was movement. Not a person, not clearly. Just the shadow of something passing slowly in front of the camera, stopping near the bedroom door. The same door I used to lock every night. It lingered there. Then the doorknob twisted. Slowly. Deliberately. But no one was living there. The house had been empty for months. I deleted the app. I didn't tell Jen. I couldn't sleep that night. And sometimes even now, in the middle of the night, I still wake up with that feeling. That someone is just outside the bedroom door. Waiting. The worst part is that I never believed those stories myself. You know the kind, people talking about feeling watched in their own homes, hearing things at night, seeing doors move on their own. I used to laugh at them. I always thought fear came from ignorance, that once you understood your space, its creaks, drafts, and quirks, you'd never feel scared in it. That was before I bought the house. It was a modest place on the edge of town. Single story, 2 bedrooms, a bit old but charming. It had a yard, an old oak out front, and a small detached garage. The real estate agent told me an older couple had lived there for decades before passing away within months of each other. No heirs. The bank wanted it off their hands. I got it cheap. Too cheap. I moved in early spring. The weather was nice, and I remember how quiet the neighborhood felt. Almost too quiet, like time slowed down just a little once you turned into the street. I noticed, even then, that none of the neighbors seemed interested in introducing themselves. A few waved. Most just glanced and moved on. Still, I didn't care. I liked the solitude. Everything was fine at first. But there was one thing about the house I never really understood. The second bedroom. It had no windows. That wasn't a huge issue. I figured it was maybe used for storage or a home office, but there was something off about the room. The air felt heavier in there, as if it hadn't been circulated for a long time, even with the door open. The walls were unusually thick. The floor creaked differently underfoot, like the sound was being swallowed. I used it for boxes and stuff I hadn't unpacked yet. I'd keep the door shut, mostly out of habit. But every now and then, I'd find it open again. I thought maybe I wasn't closing it properly. I started pulling it firmly until it clicked. Still, sometimes I'd come home from work, and it would be open a crack. Just a few inches. Enough to see the dark room beyond. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then one night, I was woken by a sound like something shifting. I live alone, so I'm sensitive to noise. I sat up in bed, heart racing, listening. It was faint, but it was there. A sort of dragging sound, coming from down the hall. I thought maybe it was an animal outside. I got up, walked slowly down the hall, and stopped in front of the second bedroom. The door was wide open. Nothing moved inside. I turned on the hallway light and looked in. The boxes were untouched, but one of them was open. That caught my eye. I hadn't opened it. It was taped shut the last time I saw it. Inside, I found something that wasn't mine. A small, folded piece of paper wedged between the layers of an old blanket. On it were 3 words, scrawled in what looked like red pencil. Don't unlock it. That's when I realized something I hadn't thought about before. The room had a locked panel in the floor. A small square hatch, maybe 2 feet wide, with a rusted latch and a padlock. I'd seen it when I first moved in, and assumed it led to plumbing or crawlspace access. I never touched it, but now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a new padlock. I replaced the old one, telling myself it was just a precaution. But that didn't help. Over the next week, the noises got worse. Not every night, just enough to keep me unsettled. Scraping, tapping, shifting sounds. Always from that room. Always when I was in bed. One night, I left my phone recording audio while I slept. The next morning, I listened to it. For most of the recording, there was nothing but silence and the occasional sound of my turning in bed. But at 3:41 a.m., there was a distinct sound of the second bedroom door creaking open. Then footsteps, light, slow, uneven, walking down the hallway, stopping right outside my door. No knocking. No voice. Just breathing. I don't remember hearing any of it. I was asleep, but my blood ran cold. I decided to stay with a friend for a few days. I needed distance, perspective. I told him the house was creaky and that I needed to reset. But the guilt ate at me. I needed to know. So on my last day at his place, I went back to the house during the afternoon. I stood in front of that locked panel, the sunlight pouring in through the hallway behind me, and I forced myself to open it. The padlock came off with effort. The hatch creaked loudly when I pulled it back. Inside was a small crawlspace. Dirt floor. No insulation. Just darkness. I pointed my flashlight in and almost dropped it when I saw what was inside. A single, child-sized mattress. Moldy. Flattened. A tin cup. A metal spoon. Scratch marks on the wall. Dozens of them. Tallies. Hundreds. Someone had lived down there. I fell back, heart racing, and slammed the hatch shut. I called the police. They found the same things I did, along with old bones buried beneath the mattress. Animal, they said. Possibly human, but too degraded to tell. There was no record of a child ever living in the house. No missing person reports that matched. No one knew anything. I sold the place a month later. Sometimes I still dream of the hatch. In the dream, I'm lying in bed, hearing the door creak open, and I know what's coming next. I know it's coming out again. I was 23 when I moved into that house on Elridge Lane. It was a shared rental, 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a living room that smelled faintly like old beer and microwave popcorn. The place was a little rundown but cheap, and in walking distance to work. My roommates were 2 guys and a girl, all in their mid-20s, rotating shifts, mostly kept to themselves. Perfect for me. I was trying to get back on my feet after a messy breakup, and I wasn't looking for drama. The house was always a little too cold. Even with the heater running, it had this strange chill, especially near the walls. The first few nights, I slept with socks and a hoodie on. I figured the insulation was just bad. A week in, I started noticing sounds. At first I thought it was just the usual creaks and groans of an older house. Pipes, floorboards, maybe a raccoon in the attic. But then I started hearing things that didn't make sense, like whispering. Not words I could make out, just a low mumble, almost like someone talking through a wall. It was always around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, and just listen. The sounds came from inside the wall near the closet. Not outside. Not the next room. Inside the wall. I asked Jamie, the girl across the hall, if she'd heard anything weird. She laughed it off, said the house was probably haunted by bad Wi-Fi and worse decisions. I let it go. I didn't want to be the paranoid one. But I started paying attention. The scratching came next. Faint, but steady. Sometimes it sounded like nails across drywall. Other times like someone dragging their fingertips slowly, rhythmically. I'd tap the wall once, and the sound would stop. Not like a mouse scattering. More like someone listening. One night, I got bold and pressed my ear to the wall. For a long time, I heard nothing. But just as I was about to pull away, I heard breathing. Close. Steady. Not deep like someone asleep. Shallow. Alert. I jerked back and didn't sleep the rest of the night. I told myself it had to be a rat or a vent issue. Still, I started locking my bedroom door. I even jammed a chair under the knob like you see in movies. It felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was on the other side of that wall, waiting. One morning, I went to take a shower and noticed something strange in the shared bathroom. The mirror had been wiped. Not just fogged and cleared. It had a handprint. A small, greasy handprint, like someone had pressed their palm against it in the steam. None of my roommates were home that morning. That's when I started keeping a notebook. Every sound, every odd moment, times, dates. I didn't know what I was planning to do with it. Maybe to convince myself I wasn't imagining things. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I waited for the bathroom light to come on, but it didn't. Just the steps. Soft. Careful. Then I heard the door handle jiggle. My door. Then silence. I turned on the lamp, heart pounding, and saw something that made my stomach drop. The chair I always kept pressed under the doorknob was moved. Not far. Just a few inches. But it had been touched. I called in sick the next day and stayed home alone. The house was dead quiet. I walked around checking for drafts, loose boards, vents, anything that could explain what I'd heard. That's when I noticed the narrow panel in the back of the coat closet in the hallway. I'd never looked closely at it before. It wasn't a full door, just a thin panel painted over. But there was a small slit where the wood had separated slightly. I tugged at it. It gave a little. Behind it was a dark crawlspace between the walls. I shoved my phone into the gap, flashlight on, and took a photo. What I saw made me step back fast. There was a blanket, a plastic water bottle, food wrappers, a flashlight, and a pair of dirty shoes. Someone had been living in there. Not rats. Not imagination. A person. Inside the walls. I called the police immediately. They searched the crawlspace, but by the time they got there, it was empty. No one inside. Just evidence that someone had been staying there, maybe for weeks. Maybe longer. They found a small hole drilled into the wall of my room, just behind a poster. Big enough for someone to watch. We found out later that the landlord had evicted a squatter 6 months before I moved in. A man in his late 40s. Mentally unstable, according to the file. No current address. No phone. Just vanished. I don't think he ever left the house. I think he found a way back in. The room behind the walls was torn out and sealed during renovations. I moved out 2 weeks later. But sometimes, even now, I'll be lying in bed, and I'll hear a soft shifting sound near the wall. Just beneath the surface. Like someone adjusting their weight. Someone watching. And I wonder if the walls in this new place are thick enough. I haven't been back to my childhood home in over 12 years. It wasn't because I moved away or grew out of it. I left when I was 15. I left because I begged my aunt to take me in, because I refused to sleep under that roof for another night. I didn't talk about it then, and I still don't now. Most people just assumed my parents were strict, or that I was a rebellious teenager. I let them think that. The truth felt worse. But last month my mother died. Cancer. Quick, aggressive. I hadn't seen her in years. The house sat empty now, waiting to be sold. My sister, who lives across the country, asked if I'd go clear it out. Just a weekend, she said. Get the documents. Toss what you don't want. Keep what matters. I didn't want to go, but I did. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like stepping into a sealed memory. The smell hit me first, stale paper, old carpet, a faint trace of furniture polish my mom always used. The floorboards creaked exactly the way I remembered. Nothing had changed. It was like the house had been waiting. I stood in the living room for a long time, looking down the hallway. The same hallway I used to run through as a kid, afraid to walk past the last door. That door at the end. The one that was always locked. Growing up, we weren't allowed in that room. My parents called it the storage room, and said it was dangerous, filled with tools, cleaning supplies, and who knows what. I remember asking once why it had a bolt on the outside. My dad told me it was to keep it from popping open on its own. I never bought that. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and hear things behind it. Not loud, just small sounds. A shuffle, a soft knock, a dragging noise. When I'd ask my parents, they'd get angry. My mom especially. Don't talk about that room, she'd snap. There's nothing there. But I knew better. That room had a presence, a weight. When I walked past it, I held my breath, and more than once, I swore I heard breathing behind the door. Close, low, steady. I spent the whole first day sorting paperwork and boxing up kitchenware, trying not to look down that hall. But at night, as I sat in the living room eating cheap takeout, I kept glancing toward it. The house was silent. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting to be broken. The next morning, I found the key. It was in my mother's desk drawer, labeled in her tight handwriting, basement storage. But our house didn't have a basement. I stood in front of that locked door for a long time, key in hand. The bolt was rusted but intact. My hand trembled when I slid the key in and turned it. A dull click. The bolt resisted at first, but then slid open with a metallic groan. The smell hit me first. Damp, earthy, like mildew and something older. I opened the door. The room was small. No windows. The walls were bare, unfinished drywall. In the center was a child's mattress. No sheets. Just yellowed foam. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, flickering when I pulled the string. The floor was scratched, dozens, maybe hundreds of tiny scratches near the corners. And then I saw the drawings. They were on the far wall, childlike but frantic. Stick figures. Red crayon, scrawled in violent strokes. One figure was always smaller, always alone. Surrounded by taller shapes with angry faces. Over and over. And next to them words. Written in uneven, looping letters. I'm still here. I didn't leave. You forgot me. I backed out of the room, heart pounding. The moment I shut the door, I threw up in the hallway. I spent that night in my car. The next morning, I called my sister. I asked her a question I'd never dared to ask before. Do you remember a brother? There was a pause. Then she laughed nervously. What are you talking about? I told her about the room, the mattress, the drawings. She went quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, they told me it was a miscarriage, before you were born. But sometimes, I remembered things. A crib, a name. But when I asked, they got angry. I thought I made it up. I didn't answer. I couldn't. That afternoon, I went back into the room. I forced myself to really look. Behind the mattress, tucked between the boards, was a small plastic toy, an old action figure, faded and worn. I held it in my hand and felt the weight of it, the sadness, the rage. There was no birth certificate, no photos, no trace of him in any record. But I know now what they did. I don't know why. I don't know how long he was kept in there. But I know that they never let him out. And I think, some nights, I still hear him. When the house is quiet and the walls settle, there's a sound like breath. And sometimes, in the deepest part of sleep, I see a small figure standing at the end of the hallway, face pale, eyes dark, staring at me. Not angry, just forgotten. City apartments are supposed to be noisy. That's what I kept telling myself. I just moved into a third-floor walk-up in a mid-rise building in the older part of the city. The apartment was tiny, overpriced, and had that yellowish tin of decades-old lighting, but I liked it. It was mine. After years of roommates, temporary sublets, and couch surfing, this was the first time I had a place to myself. It was quiet, too. That should have been a good thing. The building was old, with thin walls and floors that echoed every step. I expected to hear my neighbors constantly, talking, arguing, watching TV, having sex, whatever. But it was mostly silent. I'd see people in the halls. A couple who lived across from me. An older woman who always kept her head down. And someone in apartment 3C, my next-door neighbor. A man, I think. Tall. Wore a beanie even in summer. Never said a word. Just nodded when we passed. That first week, everything seemed fine. But every night, around 1 a.m., I'd hear it. A dragging sound. Slow. Rhythmic. Like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. Not quickly. Not in a hurry. Just steady. At first I thought it was someone moving furniture. But every night, I started keeping track. 1:14 a.m. One night it was 1:09. Another night, 1:17. Always around the same time. Always the same sound. Drag. Pause. Drag. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was louder, definitely coming from 3C. But there were no voices. No music. Nothing else. Just the dragging. I tried not to let it bother me. It's an old building, I told myself. Pipes. Settling wood. Weird acoustics. But something about the consistency started to eat at me. Then the knocking started. Not loud. Not like someone asking to come in. Just a light tap tap tap. Always from the shared wall. Always between 1 and 2 a.m. Like someone trying to get my attention, but not too much. 3 taps. Then silence. I knocked back once. The tapping stopped. The next night, I didn't knock. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, holding my breath. I heard the dragging. Then the tapping. 3 soft knocks. Then a 4th. Louder. I didn't sleep that night. I ran into the landlord the next day. I asked him casually if anyone had complained about noise from 3C. He looked confused. That unit's empty, he said. Been that way for a few months. Guy just up and left. Still owes rent. I stared at him. No one's living there now. He shook his head. Nope. You're next to a vacant. I laughed it off, pretending I must have been confused. But inside my chest, my heart was hammering. I thought maybe he was wrong. Maybe someone new moved in, and he hadn't updated the records. But then I started watching the hallway. 3 nights in a row, I waited by my peephole between midnight and 2 a.m. No one came in. No one left 3C. No sounds from the hallway. But I still heard the dragging. Still heard the tapping. I called the landlord again and asked him to check the unit, just in case. He sighed but agreed. He opened it the next day while I stood in the hall. The apartment was empty. Completely. Dust on the floor. Unplugged appliances. No furniture. But when he opened the closet near the wall we shared, there was something strange. On the back panel of the closet door, someone had scratched lines into the wood. Vertical tallies. Dozens of them. I didn't say anything. Just stared. The landlord shook his head and muttered something about squatters and bad energy. He said he'd lock it up tight and told me not to worry. But that night, the tapping came again. 3 knocks. Then silence. Then a slow, dragging sound across my floor, right above my head. But I lived on the top floor. The next day I went up to the roof access. The door was locked. I asked the landlord for the key. He told me no one should be up there, and he rarely opens it. I asked him to check anyway. He did, reluctantly. We climbed up, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped onto the rooftop. It was empty. Concrete, gravel vents. But then, off to the side, near the building's edge, we found a blanket. Folded. Clean. And beside it, a plastic jug of water. A tin cup. And an old hammer. There was no one up there. No one visible, anyway. That night, I put a chair against my door and slept with the lights on. The dragging returned. The tapping too. Only this time, it came from the inside wall by my bathroom. When I checked the cabinet under the sink, I found something wedged between the back panel and the wall. A torn piece of cloth with dried blood on it. I moved out the next morning. The landlord didn't ask why. Maybe he already knew. I still live in the city. Different place. Different building. Top floor again, stupidly. I keep a white noise machine running every night. But sometimes, just faintly past the static, I swear I hear it again. Tap. 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 I never meant to stay in the country that long. The plan was simple. House sit for my cousin while she and her husband took their long overdue honeymoon. 2 weeks. Feed the dogs, water the plants, keep an eye on the place. In exchange, I'd get out of the city, breathe some clean air, and maybe even get some writing done. The house was a small farmhouse set back a mile off the main road, tucked between rolling hills and thick woods. No neighbors for at least a 10-minute drive in either direction. The kind of quiet you can't find in the city. At first, it felt peaceful, but I've learned something since then. There's a difference between silence and stillness. The first few days were uneventful. I slept late, took long walks with the dogs, and tried to settle into the still rhythm of the place. My cousin had warned me about the field behind the house. "Don't let the dogs wander past the fence," she'd said. "Coyotes may be worse. We don't know." At the time, I thought she was just being cautious. The field itself was beautiful, tall, dry grass that swayed in the wind like water, and a line of dense trees at the far edge. I figured they were just worried about the dogs getting lost. I kept them leashed, but something about that field didn't sit right with me, especially at night. I'd stand at the back window and stare out, and I swear it never looked the same twice. The tree line always felt like it had moved closer, and I started hearing things. At first it was just a sound like rustling grass, not surprising in the wind, but then came the footsteps. Distinct, heavy, one after another, always at night, always in the field, sometimes close enough that I was sure someone was just beyond the fence. The dogs would wake up and growl at the window, but when I turned on the porch light, there was nothing, just swaying grass. One night, I heard a knock on the back door. Not loud, just a single, soft knock. I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the door. The dogs whined and backed away. My cousin didn't have any neighbors, and no one would be out here at 2 a.m. Not without headlights, not without sound. I waited, holding my breath, until the sun rose. The next morning, I walked out to the edge of the field. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe footprints. Maybe nothing. But what I found was worse. On the other side of the fence, pressed into the tall grass, was a clear path. A narrow trail, flattened in a straight line from the tree line to the back of the house. As if someone had walked directly through the field, right up to the edge of the yard. I followed the path with my eyes until it disappeared into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. I started locking the bedroom door and keeping a heavy flashlight next to me in bed. The dogs refused to go near the back of the house after dark. They'd pace and whine, ears flat, staring at the window like they knew something I didn't. The final night, I woke up to the sound of barking. Frantic, aggressive. The dogs were at the back door, snarling, hackles raised. I rushed to the kitchen and looked out. The field was moving. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't animals. The grass was parting, slowly, like something was walking through it, coming toward the house. I flipped on the porch light. Nothing. I opened the door just an inch and listened. Dead silence. Then movement. A soft, crunching step on the gravel just outside the pool of light. I didn't see anyone, but I heard them. Breathing. Heavy. Slow. I slammed the door, locked it, and backed away. The dogs growled until morning. I left that day. My cousin came back 3 days later. I tried to tell her what happened. She smiled and said the place could be eerie at night, that she'd heard strange things before but chalked it up to animals or wind. I asked her again about the field. She hesitated, then said something I can't stop thinking about. "When we first moved in," she said, "our neighbor told us not to build the house facing that direction. Something about it being disrespectful to what used to be there." "What used to be there?" I asked. She shrugged. "Old farm. Or maybe something else. No one really talks about it." She laughed it off. Said she hadn't seen anything strange since. But when I got home and checked my phone, scrolling back through the photos I'd taken of the dogs in the field, I found one I didn't remember taking. A night shot. Blurry. Out the back window. In the far corner of the image, standing just inside the edge of the trees, is a tall, pale figure. Barely visible. Facing the house. Staring straight at the window. The man behind the fence. I moved to the village thinking it would be good for my nerves. City life had worn me down. Long hours, no sleep, too much noise. I needed peace. So when I found the listing for a small cottage on the edge of a rural village 2 hours from anywhere, I took it. It was cheap, quiet, and overlooked rolling fields that glowed gold at sunset. The village had a church, a single grocery shop, and barely any phone signal. Just the kind of stillness I thought I needed. It wasn't long before I realized that kind of quiet can drive you crazy. The cottage was old but solid. Stone walls, wooden beams, a sloped roof. The first week was pleasant enough. I painted the back room, planted some flowers, even joined the villagers for tea at the small community hall. They were kind, polite, but distant. The sort of people who smile but never really let you in. I only learned about the man behind the fence on my third week there. I was walking my dog past the edge of the village, where the hedges give way to open pasture. That's when I saw it, an overgrown property surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond it stood a crumbling house, windowless, sagging, hidden behind trees. And near the fence, facing the road, was a chair. Wooden, broken-looking. In the chair sat a man. I only saw him from a distance. Thin, still, dressed in dark clothes and wearing what looked like a cap or hood. I waved, but he didn't move. Not even a nod. Just sat there, staring. That night, I mentioned him casually to the woman who ran the grocery shop. Her face changed. "You must have seen wrong," she said quickly. "That house is empty." I told her what I saw, the man, the chair, but she just shook her head. "Don't go near it," she said. "Best to stay on the road, especially after dark." Then she rang up my milk and said no more. I couldn't shake it. The next day, I walked past again. No man. The chair was still there, though, same place, facing the road. I didn't go in. I just stood by the fence and looked. The third day he was back. Same posture. Same chair. Head slightly bowed. Something about the way he sat, completely motionless, unsettled me. Not like someone resting, but like someone waiting. Watching. I took a photo on my phone. But when I checked it, the chair was empty. I looked up, confused. He was there. Clear as day. But not in the photo. I left quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that chair. That figure. So still. Like he'd always been there. The next morning, I walked to the church, hoping to speak with the vicar. I figured if anyone knew the local history, it would be him. He wasn't surprised when I asked. "There's no man there," he said softly. "But there used to be." Then he looked at me, something heavy in his eyes. "Don't go near the fence." I pressed him, asked who had lived in that house. He hesitated, then said one name. Grath. I'd never heard of it, but when I mentioned it to the shopkeeper later, she turned pale. "You need to leave it alone," she said. That was when things started getting worse. I began waking up at night to the sound of footsteps outside. Not close, just faint. Slow. Moving along the fence line behind my garden. The first night, I thought it was a fox. The second, maybe a deer. But by the fourth night, I got up and looked out the window. At the far end of the field, near the corner where my garden met the fence, I saw the chair. And someone sitting in it. Not the same chair. Mine didn't have one like that. It looked like the same one from the house. Just there, at the edge of the fence line. I blinked. Looked again. Gone. But the next morning, when I walked out, there were 2 indentations in the grass. Small circles, side by side, like someone had dragged a chair there and sat. I stopped sleeping well. Every night the same, shadows, sounds, a presence I couldn't name. I stopped telling the villagers anything. They clearly didn't want to hear it. The final night, I woke up to a knock at the back door. Not loud, just 2 soft knocks. Deliberate. I stayed in bed. The dog growled but didn't move. The air in the room was so cold I could see my breath. The knock came again. When I finally crept to the window, hard in my throat, I saw the chair. Closer. Right against the garden gate now. And the man. He wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing beside it. Thin. Pale. Shoulders sharp beneath a dark coat. His face was hidden in shadow. But I knew somehow he was looking straight at me. I backed away from the window, sat on the floor, and didn't move until sunrise. When I opened the back door the next morning, the chair was gone. But the 2 circles in the grass remained. And something else. A word carved into the wood of the garden gate. Grath. I moved out 3 days later. No one helped me pack. No one said goodbye. I don't think they were angry. I think they were relieved. And now, in my new flat back in the city, I sometimes wake to silence. Not the comforting kind. The kind that feels watched. And when I look out the window at night, I swear I see 2 pale circles in the grass below. Waiting. I ended up in that town by accident. I was driving cross-country after quitting my job and walking out on a life I wasn't sure I ever wanted. I had no plan. Just a vague idea of heading west and staying off the highways. Somewhere around the 3rd state line, my GPS went out. No signal. No bars. Then came the low fuel warning. That's how I found Delbin. A small town nestled between hills, too far from anything important to be on a map, and too quiet to ever make a noise worth noticing. One gas station, a diner, a general store, and what looked like maybe 50 houses. All of them pale, sun-bleached, and trimmed with the same chipping blue paint. It was late afternoon when I pulled in. The gas station was closed. A paper sign taped to the door said "Back tomorrow." The general store was open. A bell rang when I entered. The woman behind the counter looked up and froze. Then she smiled. Too wide. Too fast. "You're back," she said. I blinked. "Sorry?" She tilted her head. "Don't be shy now. Same room as before?" I didn't know what she meant. I hadn't been there before. I was just looking to fill my tank and maybe grab a coffee. But something about the way she looked at me, expectant, certain, made my stomach tighten. "Actually," I said slowly, "I'm just passing through." Her smile didn't change. "Aren't we all?" She handed me a key before I could respond. "Number 4. Round the back of the diner. You remember the way." I should have refused. I should have left. But something in her voice made me take it. I walked out with the key in my palm, feeling like I'd been handed a role in a play I hadn't auditioned for. The motel was exactly where she said. For rooms, a long strip of cracked pavement, and a buzzing neon sign that just read rooms. Number 4 was at the end. Inside, it smelled like dust and time. A made bed, curtains drawn, and a light flickering above the bathroom mirror. There was nothing personal in the room, except for one thing. On the desk by the window was a photo frame. I picked it up and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a picture of me, standing by my car, wearing the clothes I had on, except I didn't remember it being taken. I was facing away from the camera, looking down at something on the ground. I turned and looked out the window. The parking lot was empty. That night, I went to the diner. It was busy, too busy for a town that small. Every table full. Everyone eating quietly, like they were part of a ritual. When I walked in, every head turned. Then they all smiled. "You made it back," said the waitress. "We didn't think you'd come again." She led me to a table that already had water poured and a slice of cherry pie waiting. "I didn't order this," I said. She just nodded, like I'd confirmed something for her. I didn't eat. I asked the man at the table next to mine how long he'd lived here. He frowned. "Lived?" I repeated the question. He smiled, like they all did. Tight. Controlled. "People don't really live here," he said. "They just stay." That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that photo. About how she said, "You're back." About the way everyone spoke to me like they knew something I didn't. Just before dawn, I packed my bag and left the key on the bed. I got in my car, turned the ignition, nothing. Battery dead. I grabbed my phone. Still no signal. I was about to head out on foot when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. Someone standing at the edge of the parking lot. Not moving. Just watching. I turned to look, no one there. I didn't wait. I started walking, fast, following the road that had brought me in. No cars. No birds. Just the sound of my shoes on the cracked pavement, and the rising feeling that the town was behind me, but not done with me. After maybe 20 minutes, I turned a corner and stopped cold. The motel was ahead of me again. Same sign. Same cracked pavement. Same 4 rooms. I hadn't turned. I hadn't doubled back. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then I walked into the general store again. The woman smiled, exactly as before. "Back again," she said. "Number 4, right?" I didn't respond. I turned and left, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The next time, I walked off the road, through the trees, following the sun, no paths, no signs. I walked for hours, until I found a small clearing with a farmhouse in the distance. A man sat on the porch. He looked up and smiled. "You're just in time," he said. "Room 4's ready." I turned and ran. Now, I don't know how long I've been here. Every time I try to leave, I end up back at that motel. The key always in my pocket. The photo always on the desk. Same pose. Same clothes. Each time I look a little more tired. A little more slouched. Sometimes, at night, I look out the window and see someone walking the edge of the lot. Slowly. Circling. I think it's me. Or someone I used to be. I moved into the apartment in early September. It was cheap, not in a nice part of the city, and definitely not something I would have chosen under normal circumstances. But I'd just gotten out of a rough breakup and couldn't afford to stay in my old place. The listing said 3 roommates, all professionals, quiet, respectful. The photos were blurry, the hallway narrow, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to land. When I moved in, only 2 of the roommates were around, Mira and Celine. They seemed fine. Not exactly friendly, but polite enough. Salim mostly kept to himself, headphones on, always in his room. Mira was quiet, but more social, the kind of person who makes you feel like you're always one question away from being judged. There was one other room down the hall, next to mine. The door was always shut. On the first night, I asked Mira about it. "Oh," she said, "that's Jesse's room." She didn't elaborate. Later, I asked Salim the same thing. He just muttered, "He's barely ever here," and turned back to his laptop. The thing is, I never saw Jesse. Never heard him come in or leave. No footsteps. No keys. But sometimes at night, I'd hear his door creak open. Then shut again. Always soft. Always slow. Once or twice, I caught a flicker of light under the door. Like a TV was on inside. But there was never sound. No voices. No movement. Just that door, closed tight every day like it had been sealed. One night, around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. As I passed Jesse's room, I heard something. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on wood. I froze. It stopped. I waited, heart pounding, staring at the door. Nothing. The next morning I asked Mira again. "So, Jesse, does he work nights or something?" She didn't look up from her cereal. "No, he just stays in there." "Doesn't he eat?" She shrugged. "Maybe when we're not home." That didn't make sense. I worked from home. I was there almost constantly. I would have noticed someone in the kitchen, or at least the fridge opening. But the weirdest part? There was no food in the fridge labeled with his name. No dishes in the sink. No shoes by the door. It was like he didn't exist. And yet, every few nights, I'd hear that door creak. That faint scratching. That flicker of light under the frame. One day, when Mira and Salim were both out, I stood in front of Jesse's door and listened. Silence. I knocked once. Nothing. I tried the knob. Locked. That night, I dreamed someone was standing over my bed. Just standing. Not touching me. Not speaking. Just watching. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. I felt breath on my cheek, hot and slow, and I knew whoever it was had come from down the hall. When I woke up, the door to Jesse's room was cracked open an inch. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that sliver of darkness. It was too early for anyone else to be up. I nudged it closed with my foot and tried to forget about it. 2 days later, Salim moved out. No warning. No goodbye. I came home and his room was empty. I asked Mira what happened. She just said, "He said he couldn't sleep." Then she looked at me and added, "You should probably start locking your door at night." That was the first time she'd looked genuinely afraid. That night, I locked my door. Propped a chair against the knob, too. I lay in bed with my eyes on the crack beneath the door. At 3:12 a.m., I heard Jesse's door open. Footsteps. Slow, soft, steady. Down the hall. They stopped in front of my door. Then came the scratching. A slow, deliberate scrape down the wood. A pause. Then another. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated. The next morning, I went to Myra's room. Her door was open. Her bed untouched. Her window was open. She never came back. The landlord didn't seem surprised when I called to ask about the room. "Yeah, that one sees a lot of turnover," he said. "People don't stay long." "Do you know anything about the tenant in room 4? I asked. Long pause. "You mean Jesse? He's been on the lease since 2017. "Right, but does he live there?" Another pause. "I'm not supposed to discuss other tenants. But off the record? Don't try to talk to him. Just let him be. Now it's just me and Jesse." The sounds haven't stopped. The creaking, the scratching, the feeling that someone's just behind the door, waiting for the right night to come in. Last week, I found my lock broken when I came home. Nothing taken. Just broken. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the lights on. Kept my back to the wall. But at some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the chair moved aside. The door cracked open. And on the floor, just inside the threshold, was a photo. A picture of me. Sleeping. Taken from inside the room. The lock from the inside. Last winter, I rented a cabin deep in the woods of Vermont. I needed quiet, that kind of heavy, crushing quiet you can't get in a city. After 2 straight years of remote work and urban noise, I just wanted to disappear into nature, recharge, and not speak to another human being for a week. I found the listing on a forum. Not Airbnb, just a private rental. The post was bare bones. A few low-resolution photos, a paragraph of description, and one phone number. I called, spoke to an older man with a shaky voice. He said the cabin had no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, no landline, and no neighbors. Perfect, I thought. The cabin was about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. No marked roads after the first 45 minutes. Just tire tracks through snow and tall, leaning pines. The deeper I drove, the more I felt the outside world slipping away. By the time I arrived, the sun was dipping low. The place was exactly as advertised, old wooden single-story. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a little kitchen, a cast-iron stove that looked older than me. Everything smelled like pine and coal dust. I settled in fast, cooked dinner, lit a fire, read by candlelight. It was quiet in a way I'd never experienced before. No hum of traffic, no muffled voices through walls, just wind and the creak of wood settling into itself. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. The second night, I woke up at 3:40 a.m. with the feeling that something was wrong. Not noise, just a feeling, like I wasn't alone. I sat up in bed and listened. The cabin was still, but not silent. There was a faint sound, a soft tapping, rhythmic, inconsistent. I got out of bed, walked barefoot across the cold floor, and stood in the living room listening. Tap, 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 pause, tap. It was coming from the back door. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. I unlocked it, opened it slowly, stepped outside. Just snow and trees. No footprints. No tracks. The tapping had stopped. Back inside, I made a mental note to check for a loose shutter or branch in the morning. Told myself the wind had moved something. Went back to bed. Next morning, I found nothing. The third night, it happened again. Same time. Same sound. Tap. Tap. Tap tap. This time I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood in the center of the room, every light on, and waited. After a few minutes, the tapping stopped. But as I stood there, I realized something that made my stomach go cold. The tapping wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from the inside of the door. From inside the cabin. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, I inspected the entire cabin. Every window. Every lock. Every crawlspace. There was nothing. No signs of anyone, or anything, having been inside. Still, I packed up that afternoon, and decided I'd leave first thing the next morning. That night, I locked the bedroom door and left all the lights on. I kept a fireplace poker next to the bed. I lay there, heart pounding, waiting for the tapping. But it never came. What came instead was worse. At 4:13 a.m., I heard the bedroom doorknob turn. Slowly. Deliberately. It clicked once, like someone testing the lock. I sat up, poker in hand, staring at the door. No sound. No movement. Then a soft exhale, right on the other side, like someone standing close enough to press their face to the door. I waited like that until sunrise. When I finally opened the door, the cabin was still. But something was off. Subtle but wrong. The kitchen chair was pulled back from the table. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. And the front door, the one I'd bolted and locked with a key, was unlocked. I ran outside, got in my car, and drove without stopping until I hit the highway. I never went back for the deposit. A few weeks later, I got curious. I called the number from the listing. The same older man answered. I told him what happened. He was silent for a moment. Then he asked something that still makes my skin crawl. "You didn't use the lock on the inside of the pantry, did you?" "What lock?" I asked. He sighed. "Behind the shelves. Most people don't notice it. There's a little sliding bolt. Used to be a storm shelter. Or a root cellar, I think. But when my brother lived up there, he started locking it from the inside whenever he went to sleep." "Why?" I asked. More silence. Then, he said sometimes, if you didn't, the door would be open in the morning. Even if you never heard a thing. He paused, like debating whether to keep going. He died up there, you know. Nothing violent. Just cold. February. Locked himself in and never came out. Took 2 weeks to find the body. I asked why he still rented the place out. "Because people don't believe stories," he said flatly. "They only believe what happens to them." I asked if anyone else had reported the same noises. He didn't answer. But before he hung up, he said one last thing. "If you didn't use that lock, you should get your car checked." I asked why. "Because sometimes it follows you home." The walls remember. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. But after spending 2 months in my grandmother's old house, I'm not so sure anymore. The house sat at the edge of a small town I'd only visited once as a kid. It was built in the 1920s, heavy wood, narrow hallways, creaking floors. The kind of place where every door has a story and every wall listens. I was there to sort through her things after she passed away. No one else in the family wanted to deal with it. I thought it would be straightforward: pack up, clean out, sell. But it wasn't. The first week was peaceful. I stayed in the guest room, unpacked boxes, and dusted off old photographs. At night, I could hear the familiar sounds of a house settling. The wind in the trees, the distant train whistle. Then the knocking started. At first, it was soft. 3 taps on the bedroom wall, like someone trying to get my attention. I thought maybe it was the plumbing or the old pipes shifting. But then the knocking came every night at exactly 2:33 a.m. I stopped sleeping through it. One night, I pressed my ear to the wall. I could hear breathing. Not mine. Slow and uneven. I asked my aunt on the phone if the house ever gave her trouble. She paused, then said, "You always notice the walls in that house. Like they remember things." I thought she was just being poetic, until I found the journal. It was tucked behind a loose panel in the attic, thick, leather-bound, and worn. Inside, my grandmother had written entries spanning decades. But one set of pages was different, recent, written in a shaky hand. She wrote about someone watching her, about noises in the night, footsteps in the hall when no one was home. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises. People imagine things when they're lonely. But then the voices started. Not loud, just whispers, faint, coming from the walls. I'd sit in the kitchen, and in the silence, hear soft conversations. Muffled, fragmented, like memories leaking through the plaster. One night, I followed the voices to the basement door. The lock was rusty, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the basement was cold and dark. I shone my flashlight down the steps and saw scratch marks on the wooden railing. Deep, frantic gouges. I shivered and closed the door. The next day, I found a hidden door behind the bookcase in the living room. It led to a narrow crawl space. Inside, I discovered old photographs taped to the walls, faces I didn't recognize, children mostly, with eyes scratched out. I took a step back. That night, the whispers turned to words. "Help me." I swear I heard my grandmother's voice. I left the house that night and stayed with a friend. When I returned, the neighbors told me stories. They said my grandmother was a quiet woman, but she'd been afraid in her final years. Afraid of the house. Afraid of someone inside it. I confronted the family. No one wanted to talk, except my uncle. He told me about a relative who had disappeared decades ago. A child, never found. The house had been silent about it, but not empty. The last entry in my grandmother's journal read, "They come at night. I can't hide. The walls remember." I left the house the next day, and when I look back, I realized maybe the walls weren't remembering after all. Maybe they were warning. Alone in the silence. I thought moving to Alaska would be the fresh start I needed. The city noise, the endless crowds, the pressure, I wanted none of it. Just me, a small cabin, and the vast wilderness. I imagined crisp air, quiet nights, and solitude. I found a rental cabin a few miles outside a tiny town called Willow Creek, accessible only by a rough dirt road that vanished into endless spruce forests. The owner warned me. Cell service was patchy, the neighbors were few and far, and winter came early. I didn't care. I packed my bags and drove north, past frozen rivers and abandoned logging camps, until I reached the cabin as the sun was setting. A squat wooden building, smoke curling from the chimney, surrounded by towering pines and a blanket of snow. The first night was peaceful. The silence was almost too much. No hum of electricity, no distant cars. Just the wind through the trees and the crunch of snow underfoot. On the second night, I was woken by a tapping sound on the window near the kitchen. At first, I thought it was an animal, a bird or a squirrel, but the rhythm was deliberate, slow, and steady. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing but dark forest. I told myself it was probably a branch or an animal brushing the glass. But the next night, the tapping returned, this time at the back door. I didn't get up. I lay awake, heart pounding, listening. When I finally got up to check, the door was locked, but wet footprints led away into the snow. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. The prints were muddled and half covered by fresh snow. The days grew shorter and colder. The isolation gnawed at me, but I told myself I could handle it. I had survived worse. On the fourth night, the power went out. No big surprise. The cabin relied on a generator, and the weather had been brutal. I lit candles and wrapped myself in a blanket, trying to ignore the shadows outside. That's when I heard it. A scraping sound coming from the side of the cabin. Slow, deliberate, like something dragging a claw along the wood. I peered out, but the darkness swallowed the trees and snow. I started locking every door and window, checking the propane tanks and generator repeatedly. Still, the sounds continued every night. On the sixth day, I found fresh footprints circling the cabin. They were huge, bigger than any bear I'd seen in photos, but the pattern was strange. Walking close, then far, then close again, like someone was pacing, watching. I called the owner, desperate, but no answer. The cell signal was dead. I wanted to leave, but the road was iced over, and the snow was deep. The cabin felt smaller by the day. On the eighth night, I woke to the sound of breathing just outside my bedroom window. Slow, ragged, and close. I stared into the dark, heart in my throat, and saw a pair of eyes reflecting the candlelight. I froze. Then the eyes blinked, and the figure moved. It was tall, thin, standing just beyond the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the figure. It vanished. I ran to the door, locked it, and sat shaking for hours. The next morning, the snow was disturbed, not by footprints, but by long scratches, gouges in the wood siding of the cabin. I packed what I could carry, deciding to make a run for town. As I grabbed my jacket, the lights flickered back on. The generator kicked in. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. I drove down the icy road, glancing nervously in my mirrors. Halfway to town, my car headlights caught something at the edge of the road. A figure, pale, thin, standing perfectly still among the trees. I sped up. When I glanced again, it was gone. I made it to town exhausted. The townsfolk were friendly but guarded. I asked about strange noises or figures in the woods. They exchanged glances. "You're not the first to see him," one woman said quietly. "Who?" They looked at each other. "A watcher," she said. "Keeps to the trees. Comes close but never touches." I wanted to laugh it off, but the memory of those eyes and the scratches on my cabin wouldn't leave me. I left Willow Creek the next day. Back in the city, the noise feels unbearable sometimes. But I'll take it over the silence and the watching. The quiet that never ends. After years stuck in the city, I thought a move to rural Nebraska would be the break I needed. Somewhere slow, calm, a place where the wind whistles across endless fields, and people wave when you drive past. I found a small house in a town called Cedar Grove, population less than 500, nestled between miles of corn and soybean fields. The kind of place where the nearest neighbor is half a mile away, and nights are darker than I'd ever known. I arrived in late September, when the harvest was winding down and the air carried that dry, dusty smell of fall. The house was old but sturdy, with peeling white paint and a creaky porch that looked out over a field stretching beyond the horizon. The owner warned me it wasn't a bustling place. No internet, no cell signal, and the occasional power outage. Perfect, I thought. The first few days were peaceful, the kind of silence that settles deep, where even the sounds of your own breathing grow loud. I spent my afternoons exploring the fields, walking along gravel roads lined by tall corn stalks that rustled in the wind like distant waves. But it didn't take long before I noticed something strange. On the third night, as I settled into bed, I heard a tapping on the window facing the field. Slow and steady. Tap. Pause. Tap. Like a knocking, but too quiet for anyone outside. I threw back the curtain, expecting maybe a branch or an animal, but saw nothing but darkness and swaying corn. I told myself it was the wind, just the house settling, and went back to sleep. The tapping came again the next night, this time at the back door. I got up, heart pounding, and found the door locked tight, but on the ground outside, there were fresh footprints pressed into the dirt. Not human. Too large and uneven, like something dragging one foot. The nights after grew worse. I'd wake to the sound of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, pacing near the edge of the field. Sometimes a low scraping sound against the porch railing, like claws dragging. The wind picked up, but the noises didn't stop. The isolation began to weigh on me. No neighbors close enough to hear or help. No cell phone reception for miles. One morning, I found long scratches carved into the siding of the house, jagged and deep. They weren't there the day before. I tried calling the owner, but no answer. I decided to leave, but the gravel road was muddy and slick from recent rain. My car got stuck, wheels spinning hopelessly. The sun was setting, and the darkness pressed in fast. I sat in the car, trembling, listening to the quiet. That's when I saw it, at the edge of the field, a figure standing perfectly still, watching. Tall, gaunt, pale in the failing light. Eyes reflecting just enough to catch mine. I wanted to drive away, but my legs refused to move. The figure blinked and vanished into the corn. I finally managed to free the car, but the image stayed with me. Back in town, I asked around. Locals avoided my questions, casting wary glances. One old man finally spoke. "There's been stories for years," he said quietly. "Something out there. A watcher. Seen by farmers, travelers, but never caught." He looked me in the eye. "Most folks just keep to themselves and don't wander after dark." I didn't stay long after that. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Among the fields, at the tree line, I thought I saw those pale eyes again. Watching. The apartment above. When I moved to Miami Beach, I thought I was escaping the monotony of my small hometown. The sun, the ocean, the nightlife, it promised a fresh start. I found a small studio apartment on the 4th floor of an old Art Deco building, not far from Ocean Drive. The rent was surprisingly cheap, but I figured it was because of the building's age and the neighborhood's quiet hours. The first week was a blur of new jobs, beach walks, and late-night tacos. The city felt alive, but at night the building felt different. The walls were thin, and I could hear footsteps pacing in the apartment above me. Not just once or twice, every night for hours. At first, I thought it was a restless neighbor, maybe someone working late shifts or dealing with insomnia. But the footsteps weren't random. They followed a pattern, pacing back and forth, slow and deliberate. Around midnight, then again near 3 a.m. One night, I knocked on the door upstairs. No answer. The next day, I asked the building manager about the tenant. He hesitated. "That apartment's been empty for months," he said finally. "Last tenant moved out. No one's supposed to be up there." I laughed it off, probably a mistake, or someone else's apartment. But that night, the footsteps started again. They grew louder, heavier, as if someone was moving furniture. Then the tapping began. Soft, regular, coming from the ceiling directly above my bed. I stopped sleeping. One morning, I went to check the stairwell. The door to the 4th floor was locked tight, but I noticed fresh scuff marks on the wood near the handle. Someone had been trying to get in. That afternoon, I asked my neighbor on the 3rd floor if she heard anything. She shook her head but looked nervous. "I've heard noises too," she admitted. "But the apartment above has been empty for months. Management says it's not safe to go up there." I was tempted to call the police, but figured they wouldn't do much without evidence. Then things got worse. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I sat up, heart racing, but no one was there. The footsteps returned, louder, now accompanied by faint whispers. I checked my security camera footage the next day. There was nothing on the video, but the audio captured footsteps pacing directly above my bed. I tried to move, but the lease wasn't up for another month. On the final night, I was lying awake when I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The door slowly swung shut. Then the footsteps stopped. A heavy silence filled the room. I dared to look up. A faint shadow flickered on the ceiling, just above where I lay. And then the tapping started again, right on the ceiling. The landlord changed the locks the next day. I never asked what happened to the tenant upstairs, and I never moved back.